England, 1816. The chandeliers of Hartwell House cast their warm glow across a sea of silk gowns and evening coats, illuminating the cream of London society as they whirled across the polished ballroom floor. The orchestra filled the air with a Mozart waltz, strings blending with the hum of animated conversation and the rustle of expensive fabrics. Yet in the alcove near the refreshment table, Lady Amelia Hargrave stood alone, a silent observer in her modest gown of pale lavender. At 29, Amelia had long since accepted her place on the periphery of society. She stood with practiced stillness, her hands folded before her posture impeccable despite the weight of invisibility that pressed upon her shoulders. The gown she wore had been altered 3 times over the past seasons, the fabric carefully maintained, the modest pearls at her throat a gift from her late mother. 7 years. 7 years since she had been launched into this glittering world with hope and modest expectations. The memory felt distant now, belonging to another woman entirely. At 22, she had been presented at court during her first season, wearing a gown of white muslin that her father, Viscount Edmund Hargrave, had commissioned from London's finest modiste. The future had seemed secure then. The family holdings, though not grand, had been sufficient. Her father's investments in shipping and trade had promised prosperity. That promise had crumbled within a single year. Bad harvests in the north, a ship lost at sea, poor advice from men her father had trusted. The fortune that should have sustained the Hargrave family through generations vanished slowly at first, then with devastating speed. Amelia had watched her father age a decade in mere months, his proud bearing giving way to a hunched anxiety that never quite left his eyes. During her second season, the whispers had begun. Suitors who had once paid court suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere. Invitations that should have arrived grew fewer. Amelia understood the calculations being made in drawing rooms across London. A viscount's daughter with no dowry, with a father whose fortunes were declining, held little appeal in the marriage market where titles and wealth were traded with ruthless efficiency. She had made her choice then, a choice that still defined her life 7 years later. Her younger sister Beatrice, just 15 at the time, would have her chance. Amelia would ensure it, even if it meant sacrificing her own prospects entirely. "You look pensive this evening," came a familiar voice at her elbow. Lady Beatrice, now a married woman of 22, appeared at her sister's side with 2 glasses of champagne. Her gown of rose silk complemented her fair complexion and golden hair, and the wedding band on her finger caught the candlelight as she handed 1 glass to Amelia. "Simply observing," Amelia replied, accepting the champagne with a grateful smile. "Lady Catherine's daughter dances beautifully. She shall have no shortage of offers." Beatrice studied her sister's profile, noting the way Amelia's green-gray eyes followed the dancers with a wistfulness she likely did not realize she displayed. "You should be dancing yourself." "Should I?" Amelia's tone held gentle irony. "I believe my dancing days concluded some years ago, dear sister." "That is nonsense, and you know it," Beatrice said with unusual firmness. "You are 29, not 90. If you would only—" "Please," Amelia interrupted softly, placing a hand on her sister's arm. "I am content as I am. Truly. Your happiness is more than sufficient for us both." Beatrice's expression softened with guilt and affection. 2 years ago she had married Baron William Thornbury, a kind man of moderate fortune and good family. The match had been everything Amelia had worked toward, everything she had saved for. Their father had managed to provide a small dowry, cobbled together from the last resources he could mortgage against their dwindling estate. Beatrice's wedding had been modest but respectable, and her husband doted on her with genuine affection. But the cost of that success weighed on Amelia daily. The Hargrave estate, Maple Hill, was now mortgaged beyond redemption. Her father, at 58, lay dying in his bed, his body failing under the accumulated stress of financial ruin and regret. Beatrice and the Baron had been covering the physician's fees for months now, a charity that humiliated the proud Viscount even as it kept him alive. "How was father this morning?" Beatrice asked, her voice dropping to a more private tone. Amelia's fingers tightened slightly around her champagne glass. "Weaker. He asked after you. I told him you would visit tomorrow afternoon. I shall bring cook's beef tea. He managed to keep that down last week. Beatrice paused, then added quietly, William spoke with his solicitor yesterday about arrangements. After. The word hung between them, laden with inevitable grief and practical necessity. After their father passed, the mortgaged estate would be claimed by creditors. Amelia would have nothing. No home, no income, no independence. She would move into Beatrice's household, a permanent guest, dependent on her sister's charity for every gown, every meal, every small dignity. Your husband is very generous, Amelia said, keeping her voice steady. I am grateful for his willingness to provide me a home. You are family, Beatrice said fiercely. William would not dream of anything else. Neither would I. After everything you sacrificed for me. I sacrificed nothing that was not freely given, Amelia interrupted. You deserved your chance at happiness. I would make the same choice again. Before Beatrice could respond, a ripple of excitement swept through the ballroom. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Dancers slowed their steps. Every head turned toward the entrance where the Countess's butler stood with unusual formality. His Grace, the Duke of Ravendale, the butler announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed space. Nicholas Pemberton entered the ballroom with the unconscious authority of a man born to command attention. At 34, he stood tall and straight, his evening clothes cut with faultless precision. His black hair, slightly longer than current fashion dictated, was brushed back from a face that poets had compared to classical sculpture, all strong lines and aristocratic elegance. But it was his eyes that truly arrested attention, dark blue and penetrating, holding an intensity that made those who met his gaze feel thoroughly seen. The Duke had been absent from London for 2 years, and speculation about his whereabouts had provided endless fodder for society gossips. Now, his unexpected appearance at the Countess's ball sent waves of barely suppressed excitement through the assembled guests. Good heavens, Beatrice whispered, her eyes widening. I had not heard he was back in town. Amelia watched as matrons with eligible daughters subtly adjusted their positions, angling for an introduction. Young ladies checked their reflections in passing mirrors and practiced their most becoming smiles. Even married women seemed to stand a bit straighter, smoothing their gowns and touching their hair. He is considered quite the catch, I understand, Amelia observed with clinical detachment. The catch, Beatrice corrected. One of the wealthiest dukes in England. The Ravendale estates are said to be magnificent. She glanced at her sister with sudden mischief. And he is unmarried. Amelia laughed quietly. As am I. I hardly think that places us on equal footing for consideration. Nicholas moved through the crowd, accepting greetings with polite brevity. He spoke to no one for more than a moment, and despite the throng pressing closer, he seemed curiously isolated. There was something remote in his demeanor, as though he participated in the gathering without truly being part of it. The orchestra resumed playing, and couples returned to their dancing, though many eyes remained fixed on the Duke. He accepted a glass of wine from a passing footman but did not drink it, merely held it as he surveyed the room with those penetrating dark blue eyes. Those eyes, Amelia realized with a small jolt, were now looking directly at her. The scrutiny lasted only a moment before his gaze moved on, but she felt oddly unsettled by it. She was accustomed to being overlooked, to serving as wallpaper in these glittering gatherings. The Duke's attention, however brief, felt almost intrusive. Lady Beatrice, a jovial voice interrupted. The Baron appeared at his wife's side, offering his arm. They are forming sets for a country dance. Would you honor me? Beatrice glanced at Amelia with concern. Perhaps. Go, Amelia said warmly. Dance with your husband. I am perfectly content here. As the couple moved toward the dance floor, Amelia retreated further into her alcove, settling onto a cushioned bench that offered an excellent view of the festivities while keeping her somewhat removed from the social maneuvering. From this vantage point, she could observe without participating, a role she had perfected over 7 long years. She watched Nicholas Pemberton being introduced to Lady Catherine's daughter, saw the young woman blush and curtsy prettily. The Duke bowed with appropriate courtesy, but did not ask her to dance. Similarly, he deflected 3 other introductions with polite disinterest before extracting himself from the crowd entirely, moving toward the terrace doors where the autumn air provided escape from the overheated ballroom. The evening progressed with its usual rhythm. Amelia nursed her single glass of champagne, engaged in brief conversations with matrons of her acquaintance, and avoided the pitying glances of those who remembered her debut season and calculated how far she had fallen. When the supper interval was announced, she joined Beatrice and the Baron at a table near the edge of the dining room, grateful for their company and their willingness to shield her from excessive notice. It was near midnight when Amelia stepped onto the terrace for a moment of respite. The cool air was welcome after hours in the crowded ballroom, and she breathed deeply, letting the tension ease from her shoulders. Below, the Countess's garden stretched in formal patterns of hedge and gravel path, silvered by moonlight. She did not immediately notice the figure standing in the shadows at the far end of the terrace, but a slight movement caught her attention. The Duke of Ravendale stood with his back to the house, gazing out at the gardens with an expression of profound weariness. Amelia froze, uncertain whether to retreat or acknowledge his presence. Before she could decide, he turned and saw her. For a moment, neither spoke. "Forgive me," Amelia said quietly. "I did not mean to intrude on your solitude. The terrace is for all guests," he replied. His voice was deeper than she had expected, cultured but with an undercurrent of something rougher, more genuine. "You need not apologize." Propriety dictated that she return inside immediately. A young unmarried woman, alone with a gentleman, even on a terrace in full view of the ballroom windows, invited speculation. But something in his weary demeanor, so different from the polished duke who had entered the ballroom hours ago, made her hesitate. "The ballroom grows rather warm," she offered. "Indeed." He studied her with those penetrating eyes. "I do not believe we have been introduced." "Lady Amelia Hargrave," she said, offering a small curtsy. "Daughter of Viscount Hargrave." Something flickered across his face, recognition perhaps. "Your sister is married to Baron Thornbury." "She is. You are well informed, Your Grace." "I make it my business to be informed," he said, then seemed to catch himself. "That sounded rather arrogant. I apologize." "Not at all. It is a quality that likely serves a duke well." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You are not angling for an introduction to your unmarried daughters, Lady Amelia." "I have no daughters, Your Grace, and I have long since ceased angling for anything." He regarded her with new interest, and Amelia felt heat rise in her cheeks. That had been too honest, too revealing. She gathered her skirts, preparing to retreat. "I should return inside. Good evening, Your Grace." "Good evening, Lady Amelia." She had nearly reached the ballroom doors when his voice stopped her. "Lady Amelia," she turned back. "I am pleased to have made your acquaintance." The simple courtesy should have meant nothing, yet Amelia found herself carrying it back into the overheated ballroom as one might carry a candle flame cupped against the wind. She rejoined Beatrice, who was speaking animatedly with another young matron, and resumed her place on the periphery of the gathering. She did not see Nicholas Pemberton again that evening, but she felt his presence in the room, an awareness that prickled at the edge of her consciousness. Once, glancing toward the refreshment table, she found him in conversation with an elderly gentleman, his posture attentive despite the visible fatigue around his eyes. And later, as she prepared to depart with Beatrice and the Baron, she caught sight of him near the card room, listening to something Lady Catherine was saying with that same remote courtesy he had displayed all evening. As their carriage rattled through London's darkened streets toward the Baron's townhouse in Brook Street, Beatrice leaned close to Amelia. "Did something happen on the terrace? You seemed rather flushed when you returned." "Nothing of consequence," Amelia replied. "Simply needed air." But as she lay in bed that night in the small but comfortable chamber that Beatrice had prepared for her visits, Amelia found herself remembering the way the Duke of Ravendale had looked at her. Not with pity, not with dismissal, but with something that felt almost like recognition, as though he too understood what it meant to stand apart from the glittering crowd, observing rather than truly participating. It was a foolish fancy, she told herself firmly. Dukes did not notice spinster daughters of impoverished viscounts. Tomorrow she would visit her dying father, would read to him from the book of sermons he requested, would hold his frail hand and pretend she did not fear the future that awaited her. Tonight, however, she allowed herself to remember that brief moment on the terrace when someone had looked at her and truly seen her. It was a small comfort, but in a life grown sparse of comforts, she would not refuse it. The invitation to the Pemberton ball arrived 3 days after the Countess's gathering, delivered on heavy cream paper with the ducal seal pressed into crimson wax. Beatrice held it reverently, her eyes bright with excitement as she showed it to Amelia over breakfast. "The Duke is hosting a ball at Pemberton House," Beatrice said, her voice breathless. "It is said to be the most magnificent residence in London. We simply must attend." Amelia set down her teacup with deliberate care. "You and the Baron should go. I have no wish to—" "Nonsense," Beatrice interrupted firmly. "The invitation includes our household. Besides, I need you there. We may not have many more opportunities to attend such events together." The unspoken words hung between them. After their father's death, after Amelia moved permanently into this household, social invitations might grow scarcer. A spinster dependent on her sister's charity held an awkward position in society's carefully calibrated hierarchy. "Very well," Amelia conceded quietly. "If it would please you." Pemberton House proved even more magnificent than rumor suggested. The mansion dominated an entire block in Mayfair, its pale stone facade glowing in the evening light. As their carriage joined the queue of vehicles depositing guests at the grand entrance, Amelia felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settle over her shoulders. Her gown of ivory silk, altered yet again from previous seasons, seemed suddenly shabby compared to the elaborate creation she glimpsed through carriage windows. "You look lovely," Beatrice whispered, squeezing her hand as though sensing her thoughts. "That color brings out the gold in your hair." The entrance hall took Amelia's breath away. Marble columns soared toward a painted ceiling where classical figures danced among clouds. Twin staircases curved upward in perfect symmetry, their balustrades gleaming. Footmen in immaculate livery directed guests toward the ballroom, where the sound of an orchestra already filled the air. The ballroom itself seemed designed to overwhelm. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, their light reflected in gilt-framed mirrors that made the space appear infinite. Hothouse flowers perfumed the air, arrangements of roses and lilies positioned throughout the room with artistic precision. The crowd already assembled represented the pinnacle of London society, titles and fortunes on display in every direction. Amelia found her usual spot near a marble pillar, positioning herself where she could observe without being conspicuous. Beatrice and the Baron were immediately drawn into conversation with other young couples, leaving Amelia to her accustomed solitude. She had been standing there perhaps 20 minutes when she heard the voice. One might think she would have the dignity to retire from society entirely. The words carried clearly despite their speaker's attempt at discretion. 9 and 20 and still cluttering ballrooms. It is rather pathetic, is it not? Amelia turned slowly to find Lady Penelope Fairfax holding court among a circle of younger women. At 6 and 20, the widowed Lady Penelope possessed the kind of dramatic beauty that commanded attention, dark hair and fair skin, set off by a gown of crimson silk that pushed the boundaries of propriety. Her late husband had left her wealthy, and she wielded that wealth alongside her beauty with calculated precision. "I heard the family is quite ruined," another woman added, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "The father is dying, you know. She will be entirely dependent on her sister's charity. How fortunate that Lady Beatrice married tolerably well," Lady Penelope observed, examining her fan with apparent disinterest. "Though I imagine even the Baron's patience has limits. A permanent guest who offers nothing in return must become burdensome eventually." The words struck with surgical precision, each one finding its mark. Amelia stood motionless, her face carefully composed, though heat flooded her cheeks. She had endured 7 years of such comments, had developed armor against casual cruelty. Yet something about Lady Penelope's particular venom made breathing difficult. "Perhaps she hopes to snare some desperate widower," one of the younger women suggested with a poorly suppressed giggle. "Someone whose eyesight is failing." Lady Penelope's laugh rang out, musical and cold. "My dear, even desperate men have standards." Amelia turned away with measured dignity, moving toward the terrace doors that offered escape. She would not flee, obviously, would not give them the satisfaction of visible distress, but she needed air, needed space away from those cutting voices. The terrace was blessedly empty. The cool October night a relief after the overheated ballroom. Amelia gripped the stone balustrade, willing her hands to stop trembling. She had survived worse. She would survive this. Lady Amelia. She startled at the deep voice, turning to find Nicholas Pemberton emerging from the shadows at the far end of the terrace. He wore evening clothes of severe black, the stark color emphasizing his aristocratic features and the intensity of his dark blue eyes. "Your Grace," she managed, dropping a curtsy. "Forgive me. I did not realize you were here." "I often find my own ballrooms overwhelming," he said, moving closer. The noise, the expectations, the endless performance required. His gaze searched her face. "You are distressed." "Merely in need of air," she said automatically, the practiced lie coming easily. "I heard what Lady Fairfax said to you." His voice had gone cold. Every word. Amelia felt fresh mortification wash over her. "Then you understand why I required air." "I understand that Lady Fairfax is cruel and envious," he replied, "and that you bore her venom with far more grace than she deserved." "It is hardly uncommon," Amelia said, surprised to find herself being honest. "Women like me learn to expect such treatment." "Women like you?" He stepped closer, his expression intent. "You speak as though you deserve such cruelty." "I am 29, unwed and dependent on my sister's charity," Amelia said, the words bitter. "I am precisely what she called me, a burden who clutters ballrooms." "You are nothing of the sort." The vehemence in his voice startled her. "You are a woman who sacrificed her own prospects to ensure her sister's happiness, who maintains her dignity in circumstances that would break others, who stands alone in crowded rooms rather than descend to petty cruelty herself." Amelia stared at him, uncertain how to respond. "You barely know me, Your Grace." "I know enough." He held out his hand suddenly. "Dance with me." What?" "Dance with me," he repeated. "The orchestra is playing a waltz. I am the host of this ball, and I wish to dance with you. Your Grace, I cannot. People will talk." "Let them talk." His eyes held hers. "Dance with me, Lady Amelia. Please." The please undid her resistance. She placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his palm through her glove. He led her back into the ballroom, and she felt the change in atmosphere immediately. Conversations faltered, heads turned. A ripple of astonishment spread through the assembled guests. The Duke of Ravendale, the most sought-after bachelor in England, was leading the impoverished spinster onto the dance floor. Nicholas positioned them at the center of the room, his hand settling at her waist, the other clasping her gloved fingers. The orchestra swelled into the next movement of the waltz, and they began to move. Amelia had forgotten what it felt like to dance. 7 years since anyone had asked. 7 years since she had moved to music with a partner. Her body remembered the steps automatically, following Nicholas's lead with surprising ease. He danced well, his movements confident and assured, guiding her through the turns with effortless grace. "You dance beautifully," he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "It has been a very long time," she admitted, aware of every eye fixed upon them. "Why?" he asked simply. "You know why. I have no fortune, no prospects. Gentlemen do not waste dances on women like me." "Then gentlemen are fools." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Tell me, what do you read?" The change of subject surprised her. History, mostly, biography, poetry when I need comfort." "Which poets?" "Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, though I find him rather melodramatic." A smile touched his lips. "I share your opinion of Byron. Have you read his latest?" They talked then, really talked, as they moved through the waltz. He asked her opinions on books, on politics, on the social reforms being debated in Parliament. His questions were genuine, his interest in her answers clear. He did not speak to her as one might address a spinster out of charity, but as though her thoughts held real value. The waltz ended too soon. As the final notes faded, the ballroom erupted in polite applause. Nicholas bowed over her hand, his lips brushing her glove in a gesture that sent unexpected warmth through her. "Thank you for the honor, Lady Amelia," he said formally, but his eyes held warmth that belied the conventional words. "The honor was mine, Your Grace," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. As he escorted her from the dance floor, she was acutely aware of the stares following them, the whispers erupting in their wake. Near the refreshment table, Lady Penelope watched with an expression of barely contained fury. Beatrice appeared at Amelia's side the moment Nicholas bowed and departed. "What just happened?" she whispered urgently. "I danced," Amelia said simply, still feeling the ghost of his hand at her waist. "You danced with the Duke of Ravendale?" Beatrice corrected, her eyes wide. "The entire ballroom is talking about nothing else." "I imagine they are," Amelia replied, trying to ignore the weight of all those speculative gazes. Later, in the carriage returning to Brook Street, Beatrice studied her sister with unusual intensity. Finally, she spoke, her voice careful. "Amelia, I must tell you something. Something I have wanted to say for years, but never found the courage." "What is it?" "I feel such guilt," Beatrice admitted, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You sacrificed everything for me. Your dowry, your prospects, your future. I got to have a season, to marry William, to have this life. And you were left with nothing." "You have nothing to feel guilty about," Amelia said firmly. "I made my choices freely." "But they should not have been necessary," Beatrice insisted. "If Father had not lost the fortune, if circumstances had been different, you would have had your chance too. You would have married, had children, had a home of your own. Instead, you are dependent on our charity, and it is because of me." "It is because of Father's poor investments," Amelia corrected gently, "not because of you. And I am grateful for your generosity, truly. William and I have been investigating ways to help," Beatrice continued. "Father's situation is grave, we know. When he passes, we want you to know that you have a home with us, not as a burden, never as a burden, but as family. My sister, whom I love." Amelia squeezed Beatrice's hand, emotion tightening her throat. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As she prepared for bed that night in her small chamber, Amelia replayed the evening in her mind. The cruel words from Lady Penelope, which should have devastated her, seemed somehow less important now. Nicholas's defense of her, his genuine interest in her thoughts, the way he had held her during the waltz, all of it created a warm glow that even doubt could not entirely extinguish. She knew better than to hope. Dukes did not court impoverished spinsters. Tonight had likely been an act of kindness, nothing more. But as she drifted toward sleep, she allowed herself to remember the way he had looked at her, as though she mattered, as though she had value beyond her fortune, or lack thereof. It was a dangerous memory to keep, yet she held it close nonetheless. The week following the Pemberton ball brought a curious shift in London society's rhythms. The Duke of Ravendale, who for 2 years had been an absent ghost, and for the past month merely a remote presence, suddenly began appearing at gatherings he would previously have avoided entirely. He attended Lady Westbrook's musical, though he was not known to have particular interest in Italian opera. He appeared at Lord Hamilton's card party, though he did not sit for a single hand. He materialized at the subscription ball at Almack's, that most exclusive of venues, though he danced with no one save elderly dowagers who required partners out of charity. What society noticed, what set tongues wagging with increasing fervor, was that at each event, the Duke sought out Lady Amelia Hargrave. Not obviously, not with the brazen attention that would constitute a declaration of intent, but with enough consistency that speculation became inevitable. Amelia found herself in unfamiliar territory. At Lady Westbrook's musicale, she had positioned herself in her usual corner, prepared to listen to the soprano without drawing notice. Nicholas had appeared at her side during the interval, asking her opinion of the performance. They had spoken for perhaps 5 minutes before he moved on, but those 5 minutes had been observed by 24 pairs of eyes. At the Almack's ball, he had brought her a glass of orgeat without being asked, commenting that she looked warm after accompanying Beatrice around the room. The gesture was minor, courteous rather than intimate, yet it marked her as someone worthy of ducal attention. "I do not understand what he wants," Amelia confessed to Beatrice as they sat in the morning room 3 days after the music-hall. Autumn sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the embroidery neither of them was actually working on. "Perhaps he simply enjoys your company," Beatrice suggested, setting down her needle. Is that so difficult to believe? From a duke? Yes. Amelia's voice held more bitterness than she intended. Men of his position do not befriend impoverished spinsters without motive. Perhaps it is a wager among his set. Perhaps he finds entertainment in the contrast between his status and mine. You wrong him, I think, Beatrice said firmly. I have watched him when he looks at you. That is not the expression of a man engaged in cruel sport. Amelia wanted to believe her sister. Yet 7 years of invisibility had taught caution. Hope was a luxury she could not afford, particularly not now, with her father's condition deteriorating daily, and her future growing more uncertain with each passing week. That afternoon she made her regular visit to Maple Hill, the Hargrave estate that would soon belong to creditors. The journey from Brook Street took nearly an hour, and Amelia used the time to prepare herself emotionally for what awaited. Her father had declined rapidly in recent days, his body surrendering to the accumulated weight of illness and despair. The house that had been her childhood home looked shabby now, paint peeling from window frames, gardens overgrown from lack of staff. Most of the servants had been dismissed months ago, only a skeleton crew remaining to care for the dying Viscount. The housekeeper, Mrs. Thornton, met Amelia at the door with red-rimmed eyes. He has been asking for you, my lady, she said quietly. The physician was here this morning, he said. Her voice broke. I understand, Amelia replied gently. I shall sit with him now. Her father's chamber smelled of illness, and the herbs burned to purify the air. Edmund Hargrave lay propped against pillows, his once robust frame now skeletal beneath the bedclothes. At 58, he looked decades older, his skin waxy and gray, but his eyes, when they opened at her entrance, still held clarity. Amelia, he breathed, his voice papery thin. My dear girl. She took his hand carefully, shocked by how fragile it felt. I am here, father. Rest now. Cannot rest. Not yet. He struggled to sit up straighter, and she helped him, adjusting the pillows. Must tell you. Must apologize. Father, please. No. His grip tightened with surprising strength. I failed you. Failed your mother's memory. The investments, the gambling debts I thought I could hide from you. I destroyed your future, Amelia. Your prospects. Everything you should have had. Tears burned her eyes. You did your best with impossible circumstances. I was a coward and a fool, he said, his voice gaining momentary strength. I sacrificed you to save Beatrice, and you let me. You should have raged at me, should have demanded better. Instead, you bore it all with such grace. His eyes searched her face. Tell me you do not hate me. I could never hate you, she whispered, bringing his hand to her cheek. You are my father. I love you. You deserved so much more than this half-life I condemned you to, he said, tears tracking down his sunken cheeks. Promise me you will not simply accept being Beatrice's dependent. Promise me you will find some happiness, some purpose of your own. I promise, she said, though she had no idea how to fulfill such a vow. She stayed with him until he slept, exhausted by the conversation. As she prepared to leave, Mrs. Thornton approached with obvious hesitation. My lady, the creditors sent another notice. They will take possession within a fortnight of the master's passing. I thought you should know. Amelia nodded, swallowing against the tightness in her throat. A fortnight. Her childhood home, already lost in all but name, would vanish entirely that quickly. The return journey to Brook Street felt endless. When she arrived, Beatrice took one look at her face and immediately ordered tea brought to the morning room. He is worse then, Beatrice said softly once they were alone. He asked me to promise I would find happiness, Amelia replied, her voice hollow. As though such a thing were within my power to choose. Beatrice set down her teacup with careful precision. William and I have been making inquiries. Lady Hertford seeks a companion for her mother, the Dowager Duchess of Somerset. The position would provide a small salary and independence. It is respectable, Amelia, better than simply being our permanent guest. A paid companion. The words tasted bitter. She would go from Viscount's daughter to servant, a degradation that would complete her fall from society's regard. Yet it was more than she had any right to expect. That is generous of you to arrange. I hate that it is necessary, Beatrice said fiercely. I hate what this family's misfortune has cost you." Before Amelia could respond, the butler appeared at the door. "Lady Amelia, the Duke of Ravendale has sent a note requesting permission to call tomorrow afternoon. He suggests a walk in Green Park if the weather holds, with Lady Beatrice as chaperone." Amelia stared at him, certain she had misheard. "He wishes to take me walking?" "So the note indicates, my lady." After the butler departed, Beatrice studied her sister with open curiosity. "Will you accept?" Amelia thought of her father's plea that she seek some measure of happiness, of the weeks ahead, when grief and loss would close around her entirely, of Nicholas Pemberton's dark blue eyes and the way he had defended her against Lady Penelope's cruelty. "Yes," she said quietly, "I shall accept." The following afternoon arrived crisp and clear, autumn painting Green Park in shades of gold and russet. Amelia wore her best walking dress, a deep green wool that Beatrice had insisted she borrow, and a bonnet trimmed with modest ribbon. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her gloves in the entrance hall. "Courage," Beatrice whispered, squeezing her arm before they stepped out to where Nicholas waited beside a gleaming carriage. He bowed over Amelia's hand, his touch brief but somehow electric even through the layers of fabric. "Lady Amelia, Lady Beatrice, thank you for indulging my request. I thought the weather too fine to waste indoors." Green Park bustled with fashionable society taking their afternoon exercise. Nicholas offered Amelia his arm, Beatrice walking slightly behind at the distance propriety required for a chaperone. They strolled along the gravel paths, exchanging pleasantries about the weather and the turning leaves, but Amelia sensed deeper purpose beneath the surface conversation. "I owe you an explanation," Nicholas said finally, once they had moved away from the most crowded areas, "for my absence from London these past 2 years, for the distance many have remarked upon in my manner." "You owe me nothing, Your Grace," Amelia replied. "We barely know each other." "Then allow me to offer it regardless." He guided her toward a bench beneath an ancient oak, waiting for her to sit before settling beside her at a respectful distance. Beatrice positioned herself on a nearby bench, close enough for propriety but granting them privacy for conversation. "I have estates in Northumberland," he began, his voice low and intense. "My uncle, my father's younger brother, managed them while I was in London or occupied with other holdings. For years, I trusted his stewardship without question. That trust was catastrophically misplaced." He paused, and Amelia saw genuine pain in his expression. 2 years ago, I received an anonymous letter detailing conditions on those northern estates. Tenants living in squalor, children dying of preventable illnesses, repairs neglected until cottages became uninhabitable. My uncle had been pocketing rents and spending the minimum necessary to keep the properties barely functional. "How terrible," Amelia murmured. "I went north immediately to investigate. What I found," his hands clenched into fists, "families living in conditions no human should endure, all while my uncle resided in comfort and I, their landlord, remained ignorant in London playing at society. I was complicit through negligence, Lady Amelia. Those people suffered because I failed in my duties as their duke." The anguish in his voice resonated with her own experiences of failure and regret. "What did you do?" "I dismissed my uncle immediately and spent the next 2 years rebuilding. New cottages, a school, medical facilities. I lived on the estate, supervised every detail, spoke with every family. I needed to understand what had happened, to make amends as best I could." He looked at her directly, his dark blue eyes holding hers. "And I needed to determine what kind of duke, what kind of man I wanted to be. Not the remote aristocrat who valued appearances over responsibilities, but someone who truly served those dependent upon him." Amelia understood then why he had seemed so isolated at the balls, so disconnected from society's superficial concerns. He had returned from a crucible that had transformed his priorities entirely. That night, alone in his library, Nicholas opened a drawer he had not touched in 2 years. Inside lay a narrow envelope addressed in a hand once praised for its elegance, Caroline's. He did not read it. He remembered every line. "People marry dukes," she had written, "not men." He shut the drawer and, for the first time since Northumberland, wondered whether he had brought that insult back to London with him, carried it like a flaw only he could not see. He slept poorly and rose resolved to trust what he saw in Amelia's face, rather than what an old wound insisted upon. Resolutions that trembled, even then, under their own weight. "That is admirable," she said softly. "Most men of your position would have simply hired a new manager and returned to London." "Most men of my position care more for pleasure than duty," he replied. "I no longer wish to be that manner of man." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching other walkers pass along the path. Finally, Amelia spoke. "I understand something of sacrifice and duty," she said, "of making choices that cost you dearly but that you cannot regret, because they served a greater purpose. My sister's happiness, my father's peace, these things required that I set aside my own prospects. I would make those same choices again, yet I cannot pretend they did not exact a price." "What price?" he asked gently. 7 years of invisibility, of becoming someone society notices only to pity or mock, of having no future beyond dependence on others' charity. She surprised herself with her honesty. "But what is my small suffering compared to true hardship? I have never gone hungry, never lacked shelter. I have no right to complain." "You have every right," Nicholas said firmly. "Suffering is not a competition, Lady Amelia. Your sacrifices were real. Your pain is valid." Something loosened in her chest at his words, a knot she had not realized she carried. They talked then, truly talked, about duty and responsibility, about the weight of obligations to family and dependents, about the cost of doing what conscience required, even when it destroyed personal happiness. As they walked back toward the carriage an hour later, Nicholas said quietly, "I hope we might continue these conversations. I find your perspective valuable, your insights genuine. So much of society traffics in pleasant lies. You speak truth, even when it is uncomfortable." "I have little left to lose by honesty," Amelia replied. "Or perhaps you have always possessed the courage to be honest," he countered, a rare quality in any sphere of life. As they parted, Nicholas bowing over her hand with lingering warmth, Amelia felt something dangerous and hopeful stirring in her chest. She crushed it firmly. Dukes did not court impoverished spinsters, no matter how pleasant their conversations. This was friendship at most, perhaps simply the kindness of a man who had learned to value character over circumstance. Yet as she lay in bed that night, she could not stop replaying his words, the way he had looked at her as though she mattered, as though her thoughts held genuine weight. It was a beautiful illusion, and she would not let herself believe it for a moment longer than necessary. But oh, what a beautiful illusion it was. The letter arrived on a gray November morning, delivered by a rider whose urgency communicated everything before Amelia broke the seal. Her father's physician wrote with clinical brevity that Viscount Hargrave had passed peacefully in the night. His suffering finally ended. Amelia read the words 3 times before their meaning penetrated. Then she folded the letter carefully, set it on the breakfast table, and walked upstairs to her chamber. Only when the door closed behind her did she allow the tears to come. The funeral was a modest affair held at the parish church near Maple Hill. A handful of neighbors attended, their presence more obligation than affection. The Viscount had become increasingly isolated in his final years, his financial disgrace creating distance where friendship had once existed. Beatrice and the Baron stood on either side of Amelia throughout the service, their support both physical and emotional, as she watched her father's coffin lowered into the earth beside her mother's grave. "He is at peace now," Beatrice whispered as they turned to leave the churchyard. "His suffering is over." Amelia nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Peace for him, perhaps. But for her, the true consequences of his death were only beginning. Within a week, the creditors descended upon Maple Hill. The house that had sheltered 3 generations of Hargraves was stripped methodically, furniture catalogued, paintings removed from walls, even the books from her father's library boxed and carried away. Amelia was permitted to keep only her personal belongings and a few items of sentimental value that held no monetary worth. The move to Brook Street happened with surprising efficiency. Mrs. Thornton wept as she helped pack Amelia's trunk, the old housekeeper's employment ending with the estate itself. By the 2nd week of December, Amelia stood in the guest chamber that Beatrice had prepared, surrounded by the modest remnants of her former life, and understood that she was now entirely dependent on her sister's charity. "This is your home," Beatrice insisted, helping arrange Amelia's books on a small shelf. For as long as you need it. Forever, if necessary. You are very generous, Amelia replied, forcing a smile. Both you and the Baron. The days that followed blurred together in the gray monotony of mourning. Amelia wore black, received no visitors, attended no social functions. The rules of deep mourning were strict, and she followed them meticulously. No balls, no dinners, no entertainment of any kind for the first months. Later, half-mourning would permit some social interaction, but even that would be severely limited. Nicholas respected her grief with thoughtful consideration. A week after the funeral, a package arrived containing 3 books Amelia had mentioned during their walk in Green Park. The note accompanying them was brief but kind, expressing condolences and the hope that she would find some comfort in reading. Over the following weeks, other small gestures arrived. A basket of hothouse flowers when January brought snow and gray skies. A new translation of Homer that he thought might interest her, always accompanied by respectful notes that demanded nothing, expected nothing, simply offered quiet support. The months passed slowly. Winter did not break all at once. It thinned. By early March, the air over Brook Street tasted of rain rather than ash, and the black of deep mourning had softened to grays that hurt no one's conscience. Amelia had kept to the quiet rooms for 4 months, emerging now with a steadier tread and the determined economy of a woman who had learned how to live on very little: time, funds, illusions. Lady Penelope Fairfax had intensified her campaign to capture the Duke of Ravendale, appearing at every event he attended, positioning herself in his orbit with calculated persistence. She had also, Amelia learned from Beatrice, been spreading rumors about the Hargrave family's debts, about Amelia's complete dependence on her sister, about how desperate she must be for any offer of marriage. "She is threatened by you," Beatrice said one afternoon as they sat in the morning room. "She sees how Nicholas looks at you and it frightens her." "That is absurd," Amelia replied. "The Duke and I are barely acquainted. He was kind during a difficult time, nothing more." "Are you truly so blind?" Beatrice asked. "Amelia, he sent you gifts throughout your mourning. He has inquired after your welfare weekly through William. That is not casual acquaintance. That is courtship conducted within the bounds of propriety." Amelia wanted to believe her sister, yet caution held her back. Hope had proven dangerous in the past. The first invitation Nicholas extended after her mourning period ended was for tea at his residence, with Beatrice present as chaperone. Amelia accepted with carefully managed expectations, reminding herself that friendship was sufficient, that she should not hope for more. Pemberton House seemed less overwhelming now, its magnificence somehow familiar rather than intimidating. Nicholas received them in a smaller drawing room, more intimate than the grand public spaces, where afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the gardens. "Lady Amelia," he said, rising as they entered, "I am pleased to see you again, though I wish the circumstances that prevented our meeting had been different." "Thank you for your kindness during my mourning," she replied. The books were a great comfort. They settled into conversation with surprising ease, discussing literature and current affairs while Beatrice worked on embroidery nearby. Yet something felt different now. Nicholas seemed to study Amelia more intently, as though searching for something in her expression. His questions probed deeper than polite conversation typically permitted, asking not just about her reading but about her thoughts on philosophy, on social reform, on the role of the aristocracy in a changing world. "You have returned to a much-changed London," he said finally. "I hope you will find your place in it again." "I am not certain I ever had a place in it," Amelia admitted, "but I shall manage." As they prepared to leave an hour later, Nicholas asked if he might call again soon. "Perhaps a walk in the park, when the weather improves, if that would be agreeable." Amelia agreed, and as their carriage rolled away from Pemberton House, she felt something stir that felt dangerously like hope. Yet not everyone welcomed her return to society. Within days of that tea, whispers reached Beatrice's ears. Lord Timothy Fairfax, Nicholas's cousin and heir presumptive, had been asking questions about the Hargrave family. Not casually, but with specific interest in their financial situation, in Amelia's past, in anything that might prove useful ammunition. "William's solicitor mentioned it," Beatrice told Amelia privately. "Timothy has been speaking with former servants from Maple Hill, offering money for information. He is building a case against you, though for what purpose, we cannot yet determine. He fears I might somehow entrap his cousin, Amelia said, understanding immediately. If Nicholas were to marry and produce an heir, Timothy would lose his expectation of inheriting the dukedom. Precisely, Beatrice replied, which means he will do anything to prevent such a marriage. The realization settled over Amelia with cold clarity. She was not simply navigating her own uncertain future. She had become a piece in a larger game, one where powerful people had invested interest in her failure. The spring rain had finally given way to sunshine when Nicholas called at Brook Street 3 days after their tea at Pemberton House. Amelia received him in the small drawing room, where Beatrice sat with her embroidery near the window, close enough to satisfy propriety, but granting them space for private conversation. Nicholas stood before the fireplace, his posture uncharacteristically tense. The easy conversation of their previous meetings seemed absent, replaced by something weighted with purpose. Amelia felt her pulse quicken as she studied his face, searching for clues to what had brought him here. "Lady Amelia," he began, then stopped, running a hand through his dark hair, in a gesture she had never seen from him before. "I find myself uncertain how to proceed. I had planned a speech, but now the words seem inadequate." "Then perhaps speak without planning," she suggested gently. "I have always valued honesty between us." He met her eyes directly, and the intensity in his gaze made breathing difficult. "I wish to court you, formally, with the intention of marriage, should you be willing." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and terrifying. Amelia felt the floor shift beneath her, as though the earth itself had tilted. She had suspected his interest, yet hearing it stated so plainly stripped away all her careful defenses. "Your Grace," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice, "I am honored by your regard, truly, but I must decline." Pain flashed across his face before he mastered his expression. "May I ask why?" Amelia rose, needing movement to contain the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She crossed to the window, though she saw nothing of the garden beyond. Behind her, she heard Nicholas remain motionless, waiting for her explanation. "Because it would be unconscionable," she said finally, turning to face him. "You are a duke, one of the wealthiest men in England. I am 29 years old, without fortune, without property, without anything to bring to such a union. I am entirely dependent on my sister's charity for the very roof over my head." "None of that matters to me," Nicholas said quietly. "It should matter," Amelia insisted. "The disparity between us is not merely financial. It is social, practical, insurmountable. Society already whispers about me, about my situation. If you were to court me, those whispers would become shouts. They would say I trapped you, that I used whatever arts desperate women employ to secure a title and fortune." "Let them say what they will," he replied, moving closer. "I care nothing for their opinions." "But I care," Amelia said, her voice breaking slightly. "I care that you would be subjected to speculation and ridicule. I care that your choice would be questioned, your judgment doubted. I care that Timothy Fairfax and Lady Penelope Fairfax and a dozen others would make it their mission to expose me as the fortune hunter they believe me to be." She pressed her hands together, trying to contain the trembling. "And more than all of that, I care that you might come to regret choosing me. That years from now, when the novelty of my conversation has worn thin, you will look at your Duchess and wonder why you bound yourself to a woman who brought you nothing but scandal and speculation." Nicholas closed the distance between them in 3 swift strides. He did not touch her, but his proximity made her heart race. "Is that truly what you believe? That my interest in you is mere novelty? That I have not considered every aspect of what I am proposing?" "I believe you are a good man," Amelia said, meeting his gaze, though it cost her. "A man whose sense of justice might lead him to offer what he perceives as rescue. But I do not wish to be rescued, Your Grace. I do not wish to be your charitable endeavor." "Charitable endeavor," Nicholas repeated, something dangerous entering his tone. "Is that what you think this is?" He stepped back, his jaw tight. For a long moment he stood silent, and Amelia feared she had wounded him too deeply for repair. Then he spoke, and his voice carried a vulnerability she had never heard from him before. "When I was 26, I became engaged to Lady Caroline Westfield. She was beautiful, accomplished, perfectly suited to be a duchess in the eyes of society. The engagement was celebrated by everyone who knew us. Amelia remained still, sensing the importance of what he was about to reveal. Caroline had no true interest in me. Nicholas continued, his gaze distant with memory. She wanted the title, the fortune, the position. When I spoke of my plans for the estates, of improving conditions for tenants, of using our resources to create schools and medical facilities, she laughed. She called such concerns beneath a duke's notice, said I was peculiar for caring about the welfare of common people. His eyes refocused on Amelia's face. She ridiculed my interest in books, in philosophy, in anything beyond the superficial concerns of society. She made clear that once we married, I would be expected to perform my role while she enjoyed the fruits of the title. When I discovered her true nature, I ended the engagement immediately. "I am sorry," Amelia said softly. "That must have been painful." "It was instructive," Nicholas replied. "It taught me the difference between someone who wants what I represent and someone who sees who I truly am. For years after, I avoided society entirely. I could not trust anyone's motives. Every smile seemed calculated, every conversation transactional." He moved closer again, and this time when he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. "Then I saw you standing alone at the Countess's ball, bearing your isolation with such dignity. I heard the cruel things Lady Penelope said, saw how you refused to respond in kind. I watched you sacrifice everything for your sister's happiness without bitterness or complaint. And I realized I was seeing something rare, Lady Amelia. Character, true character." "Your Grace," Amelia began, but he held up a hand. "I am not finished. You speak of what you cannot bring to a marriage. Let me tell you what you offer. Intelligence that challenges mine. Compassion that shames my occasional cynicism. Strength that has survived 7 years of society's contempt without breaking you. Honesty that refuses comfortable lies even when they would serve you better." He paused, his dark blue eyes searching hers. "You are not Caroline. You do not want my title or my fortune. In fact, you are so determined not to be seen as a fortune hunter that you would refuse me, even though I see the way you look at me, the way your breath catches when I am near, the way your hand trembled in mine when we danced." Heat flooded Amelia's cheeks, mortification and something else warring within her. "I have no right to such feelings." "You have every right," Nicholas said firmly. "As do I. I am not offering charity, Lady Amelia. I am not seeking to rescue you. I am asking you to be my partner, my equal in all the ways that truly matter. Not in fortune or status, but in values, in purpose, in the vision of what a life of meaning might look like." Tears stung her eyes despite her efforts to contain them. "You paint a beautiful picture, Your Grace. But beautiful pictures do not survive contact with reality. The world will not see me as your equal, no matter what you believe. Then they are fools," he said simply. "And I care far more about your opinion than theirs." The silence that followed stretched between them, weighted with possibility and fear. Amelia felt herself wavering, wanting desperately to believe in the future he offered, yet terrified of the cost should it prove an illusion. "I need time," she said finally, "to consider what you have said, to understand my own heart. Can you grant me that?" Relief softened Nicholas's expression. "Of course. I will not press you." "Take all the time you require." As he moved toward the door, he paused beside her. Without asking permission, he lifted her hand to his lips. But unlike the brief courtesy of previous farewells, this kiss lingered, his mouth pressing against her gloved fingers with unmistakable intensity. When he raised his eyes to hers, the heat in them sent a shiver through her entire body. "I shall wait for your answer," he said quietly, "however long it takes." After he departed, Amelia sank onto the settee, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. Beatrice immediately set aside her embroidery and joined her. "That was quite a declaration," Beatrice said, her eyes bright with emotion. "It was impossible," Amelia replied weakly. "Everything about this situation is impossible, or perhaps merely improbable," Beatrice suggested. "There is a difference." Before Amelia could respond, The Baron entered the room, his expression troubled. "I apologize for interrupting, but I have news that cannot wait." He crossed to where Beatrice sat, his hand resting on her shoulder. "My solicitor has uncovered something disturbing. Timothy Fairfax has been conducting an investigation into the Hargrave family. He has been interviewing former servants from Maple Hill, offering substantial sums for information about Amelia's past." Amelia felt coldness settle in her stomach. "What kind of information?" "Anything that might be used to discredit you," the Baron replied grimly. "He seeks evidence of impropriety, of scandal, anything that would make you an unsuitable match for his cousin. Timothy stands to inherit the dukedom if Nicholas dies without heir," Beatrice explained to Amelia, though she likely already understood. "A marriage would threaten that expectation. He will do anything to prevent it." "I suspected as much," Amelia said quietly. "It is another reason why Nicholas's suit is impossible. I would bring not just scandal, but actual danger to his peace. Or," the Baron said carefully, "you could choose to fight. My solicitor is quite skilled. I have taken the liberty of having him begin his own investigation into Timothy's activities. If the man is conducting a campaign against you, we should be prepared to defend." Amelia looked between her sister and brother-in-law, seeing the determination in their faces. For years she had stood alone, accepting society's judgment without defense. Now, for the first time, she had allies willing to stand with her. "I do not know what to do," she admitted. "My heart tells me one thing, my reason another." "Then listen to both," Beatrice said, taking her hand. "Nicholas is offering you a genuine partnership, Amelia. Not rescue, not charity. The question is whether you have the courage to accept it." That night, lying in her bed in the small chamber that was not quite home, Amelia considered everything that had transpired. Nicholas's declaration, his revelation about Caroline, the intensity of that final kiss, the knowledge that powerful people were working to destroy any possibility between them. She thought of her father's final plea that she find some measure of happiness, of 7 years spent invisible and uncomplaining, of the life stretching before her, either as Nicholas's Duchess or as a permanent dependent in her sister's household. For the first time in those 7 long years, Amelia allowed herself to hope. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, this fragile possibility of something more. She did not yet know what her answer would be, but she knew she could not dismiss his offer simply from fear. Tomorrow she would begin to truly consider what her heart wanted, not merely what circumstance demanded. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would find the courage Beatrice spoke of. The courage to reach for happiness, even when everything about the situation seemed impossible. The letter arrived at Pemberton House on a gray May morning, delivered by a messenger who claimed to have found it abandoned near a coaching inn. The butler brought it to Nicholas immediately, noting the unusual circumstances with appropriate concern. Nicholas broke the seal with idle curiosity that transformed rapidly into shock as he read the contents. The letter was addressed to a Mr. Edward Hastings, written in a feminine hand that the signature identified as belonging to Amelia Hargrave. "My dearest Edward," it began, "your patience during these trying months has been my only comfort. Soon father's affairs will be settled, and I shall be free to honor the understanding between us. The Duke's attention provides necessary cover for our plans, though I confess the deception weighs upon my conscience. Once his suit has served its purpose in restoring my reputation, we may finally be together as we have long desired." Nicholas read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing fresh pain. The handwriting appeared authentic, incorporating flourishes he recognized from notes Amelia had written thanking him for books. The details were specific, references to conversations they had shared, to her father's estate troubles. Only someone intimately acquainted with the Hargrave situation could have written such a letter. A second document accompanied the first, a brief note from Edward Hastings to an unnamed correspondent, discussing his expectation of marriage to Miss H, once her current scheme had succeeded in securing financial stability. Nicholas felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest. This was Caroline all over again. Another beautiful performance, another calculated deception. He had believed Amelia different, had trusted in the authenticity of her character, her genuine nature. The evidence before him suggested he had been catastrophically wrong. By afternoon, his solicitor had confirmed through careful inquiry that an Edward Hastings had indeed been a guest at the Hargrave estate some years ago, the younger son of a gentleman farmer in Hertfordshire. The connection appeared legitimate. That evening, Nicholas attended a small gathering at the home of Lord and Lady Weston, knowing Amelia would be present. He had considered avoiding her, but anger and betrayal demanded confrontation. He needed to see her face when he presented the evidence, needed to know if she would maintain her pretense or finally reveal her true nature. Amelia arrived with Beatrice and the Baron, her appearance modest as always in a gown of pale gray silk appropriate to her half-mourning. She smiled when she saw Nicholas across the room, a smile that now seemed calculated to deceive. He approached her in the music room during the interval between performances, where other guests mingled over refreshments. Beatrice stood nearby, speaking with Lady Weston about some charitable project. "Lady Amelia," Nicholas said, his voice carefully controlled. "A word, if you please." Something in his tone made her smile falter. "Of course, Your Grace. Is something wrong?" "That depends entirely on your definition of wrong." He drew the letters from his pocket, holding them where she could see. "Would you care to explain these?" Amelia's brow furrowed in confusion as she scanned the documents. Nicholas watched her face carefully, searching for guilt, for recognition. What he saw instead was genuine bewilderment. "I do not understand," she said slowly. "This appears to be my handwriting, but I never wrote these words. I have never corresponded with anyone named Edward Hastings, and certainly never wrote about using your suit for purposes of reputation or financial gain." "You deny writing this?" Nicholas asked, his voice hardening. "Despite the handwriting, despite the specific details about your family situation that only someone intimately acquainted with the circumstances could know?" "I absolutely deny it," Amelia replied, her voice gaining strength despite the tremor he detected. "Your Grace, I have been honest with you from our first meeting. I have never pretended regard I did not feel, never calculated to entrap you. These letters are fabrications." "Convenient," Nicholas said coldly. "Yet the evidence suggests otherwise. The handwriting has been examined. The details are authentic. The connection to Mr. Hastings has been confirmed." Color drained from Amelia's face. Around them, other guests were beginning to notice the tension, conversations dropping as attention shifted toward them. "If you truly believe I am capable of such deception," Amelia said quietly, her dignity intact despite the devastation in her eyes, "then you do not know me at all. More importantly, you do not trust me. And without trust, Your Grace, there is no foundation for any relationship between us." She handed the letters back to him with steady hands. "I can only tell you these are forgeries, created by someone who wishes to damage me in your eyes. If you cannot believe that, if you cannot give me the benefit of doubt after everything we have shared, then we have nothing further to discuss." Without waiting for his response, she turned and walked from the music room, her posture straight, her steps measured. Every eye in the room followed her departure. Beatrice appeared at Nicholas's elbow moments later, her expression furious. "What have you done?" she hissed, mindful of their audience. "I confronted her with evidence of her deception," Nicholas replied, though doubt had begun creeping into his certainty. Something about Amelia's reaction, the genuine confusion in her eyes, the pain that seemed too authentic to be performance, unsettled him. "Evidence," Beatrice repeated scornfully. "My Lord Duke, I suggest you examine the source of your evidence before you destroy something irreplaceable." She followed her sister from the room, leaving Nicholas standing alone while speculation erupted around him. The following morning, Beatrice sat in her husband's study, the forged letters spread before them alongside notes from the Baron's investigation into Timothy Fairfax's activities. "The messenger who delivered these to Nicholas," the Baron said, reviewing his solicitor's report. "His description matches a man known to work for Timothy. My solicitor applied appropriate pressure, and the fellow confessed readily enough. Timothy paid him handsomely to claim he found the letters near a coaching inn." "So they are forgeries," Beatrice said, though she had never doubted it. "Can we prove it? I took the liberty of consulting Mr. Pemberton, the calligrapher on Bond Street. He examined both the alleged letters and genuine samples of Lady Amelia's handwriting that you provided. The Baron handed her the expert's written opinion. He states unequivocally that while the forgery is skilled, there are distinct differences in letter formation, pen pressure, and habitual flourishes. Someone studied Amelia's hand carefully, but could not perfectly replicate it. Beatrice felt rage and relief warring within her. Timothy created these to destroy any possibility of marriage between his cousin and my sister. If Nicholas marries and produces an heir, Timothy loses his expectation of inheriting the dukedom. Precisely, the Baron agreed. The question now is what we do with this information. We confront Nicholas immediately, Beatrice said, gathering the documents, before more damage is done. That same morning, Nicholas sat in his study at Pemberton House, the letters before him, Amelia's words echoing in his mind. If you cannot believe that, if you cannot give me the benefit of doubt after everything we have shared, then we have nothing further to discuss. He had spent the night replaying their confrontation, remembering the shock and pain in her face, the genuine confusion. He thought of Caroline, whose lies had been smooth and practiced, whose denials had held calculation rather than authentic distress. Amelia's reaction had been nothing like Caroline's. More troubling were the inconsistencies he was beginning to notice. The letter mentioned details of conversations they had shared, yet the tone seemed wrong, too calculating for the woman who had refused his suit from concern for his welfare rather than from false modesty. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His butler entered with unusual formality. Your Grace, Lady Beatrice and Baron Thornbury request an immediate audience. They claim the matter is urgent and concerns Lady Amelia. Show them in, Nicholas said, something in his chest tightening with apprehension. Beatrice entered with barely contained fury. You owe my sister an apology, Your Grace, and you owe it to yourself to see the truth before you destroy both your futures through baseless suspicion. She laid the documents before him. The messenger's confession, the calligrapher's expert opinion, detailed evidence of Timothy's investigation into the Hargrave family over recent months. Your cousin created these forgeries, Beatrice said without preamble. He used information he obtained by bribing former servants at Maple Hill, combined it with samples of Amelia's handwriting likely stolen or copied, and manufactured evidence designed to destroy your trust in her. He did this because your marriage would end his expectation of inheriting your title. Nicholas felt the world tilt as he absorbed the documents before him. The messenger's confession was detailed and damning. The calligraphy expert's analysis pointed out specific discrepancies he had missed in his initial anger. The pattern of Timothy's activities over recent months showed clear intent and planning. I have made a terrible mistake, Nicholas said, his voice hoarse. Yes, Beatrice agreed without mercy. You allowed past wounds to blind you to present truth. You failed to trust the woman who has shown you nothing but honesty, even when that honesty cost her your good opinion. Nicholas rose, pacing to the window. In the street below, London continued its daily business, oblivious to the wreckage he had created. I must see her. I must explain, apologize. She will not see you, Beatrice said flatly. I left her this morning resolved to accept the position as companion to the Dowager Duchess of Somerset. She intends to leave London entirely, to remove herself from society and from you. The words struck like physical blows. Nicholas turned back to face them. Please, tell me how to make this right. That is not for us to determine, the Baron said quietly. You wounded her deeply, Your Grace. Whether she can forgive that wound, whether she should forgive it, must be her decision alone. After they departed, Nicholas sat amid the evidence of his catastrophic error. He had done exactly what he swore never to do again after Caroline. He had allowed fear and past pain to poison present possibility. Worse, he had done it to the one woman who deserved his trust absolutely. He would go to her, he decided. Not to demand forgiveness, but to give her truth. To place before her complete honesty about his failure, his fears, his recognition of the wrong he had done, and then he would give her what he should have given from the beginning. Complete faith in her word, in her character, in the genuine nature she had shown him from their first meeting. Whether she chose to accept his contrition would be entirely her choice. He had forfeited any right to expect otherwise. Nicholas arrived at Brook Street within the hour, his carriage barely stopping before he descended. The butler who answered his knock looked uncomfortable as he delivered Amelia's message. "Lady Amelia is not receiving visitors, Your Grace." "Tell her I will wait," Nicholas replied, moving past him into the entrance hall. "For as long as necessary." The butler retreated, and Nicholas settled onto an uncomfortable bench in the hallway. Through the closed drawing-room door, he could hear muted voices, Beatrice's among them. He waited. An hour passed, then another. Servants moved through the hall on various errands, casting curious glances at the Duke who sat motionless in their entrance. The afternoon light shifted, shadows lengthening across the marble floor. Still, Nicholas waited. When the drawing-room door finally opened 3 hours after his arrival, it was Beatrice who emerged. "She will see you now," she said quietly. "Do not waste this opportunity, Your Grace." Amelia stood by the window, her back to him as he entered. She wore a simple day dress of gray muslin, her hair arranged in a modest style that made her look younger than her 29 years. When she turned to face him, the pain in her eyes was evident despite her composed expression. "You have been waiting a considerable time," she said. "I would have waited considerably longer." Nicholas remained near the door, giving her space. "Lady Amelia, I have come to offer not excuses, but truth. I failed you catastrophically. I allowed old wounds and fear to corrupt my judgment. I looked at forged letters and saw Caroline's betrayal instead of seeing you, the woman who has shown me nothing but honesty from our first meeting. Your cousin created those letters," Amelia said. "Beatrice showed me the evidence. I understand the deception was skilled." "The deception was irrelevant," Nicholas interrupted. "I should have trusted you. Not because the evidence was faulty, but because you had earned that trust through every interaction we shared. Instead, I condemned you without giving you the benefit of doubt you deserved." He took a breath. "I became the very thing I despised in others. I judged you by your circumstances rather than your character." Amelia moved to the settee, sitting with careful composure. "Why did you believe the letters so readily?" Nicholas crossed to stand before her, though he did not sit. "Because some part of me believes I do not deserve genuine regard. Caroline taught me that my title and fortune would always matter more than the man who possessed them. When evidence appeared suggesting you were no different, it confirmed my deepest fear rather than contradicting everything I knew about you." "That is honest, at least," Amelia said quietly. "You asked me once to speak without planning." "Very well." Nicholas knelt suddenly, bringing himself to her eye level. The gesture shocked her, a duke on his knees before a woman society barely acknowledged. "I love you, Amelia. Not your connections, not your position, but you. Your intelligence that challenges mine, your compassion that humbles me, your strength that survived 7 years of society's contempt without breaking you. When I wounded you with my distrust, I wounded the best part of my own life." Tears gathered in Amelia's eyes despite her efforts to contain them. "Pretty words, Your Grace. True words," he corrected gently. "And I offer you something beyond words. Complete control over what happens next. Timothy and Lady Penelope conspired to destroy your reputation and my trust in you. If you wish me to expose them publicly, I will do so. If you wish to prosecute Timothy through the courts, I will support it. If you wish me to leave you in peace and never approach you again, I will honor that choice, though it destroys me. Why give me such control? Because I took control from you when I believed those letters without consultation," Nicholas said. "I decided you were guilty without granting you voice or agency. I will not compound that error by deciding your future now. You are not my project to manage, Amelia. You are my equal, and it is past time I treated you as such." Amelia studied his face for a long moment. "If we are to continue in any capacity, there must be conditions." "Name them." "Trust must be rebuilt through consistent action, not grand gestures. You do not get to make unilateral decisions about us, about me, about our future, should there be one. We consult each other. We respect each other's judgment. We are partners in the truest sense, or we are nothing at all." "I agree absolutely," Nicholas said without hesitation. "Anything else?" "We expose Timothy and Lady Penelope," Amelia said, steel entering her voice. "Not for revenge, but to prevent them from harming others. They must face consequences for what they have done." Nicholas rose, offering his hand to help her stand. Then let us plan that exposure together. In Lady Penelope's morning room, the curtains were drawn against a perfectly innocent sun. Timothy stood beside the mantel, counting favors like coins. You wanted a duchess's coronet, he said. I wanted the certainty of inheritance. Our interests were harmonious. Were, she replied, turning her rings. You promised me discretion. Instead, you have delivered spectacle. Do not pretend scruple now, he said, smiling without warmth. You scattered the first whispers. Whispers, she corrected crisply. Not forgeries. Words are forgeries, Timothy said. One only chooses the instrument. 2 days later, a select gathering assembled in the formal drawing room at Pemberton House. Nicholas had invited Timothy and Lady Penelope under the pretense of discussing family business. Also present were the Baron and his solicitor, Lady Hertford and Lady Weston, two of society's most influential matriarchs, and Nicholas's own legal counsel. Timothy arrived first, his confidence evident in his easy manner. That confidence faltered when he saw the assembled company and the documents arranged on the desk. Lady Penelope entered moments later, her expression calculating as she assessed the situation. What is this? Timothy demanded. An accounting, Nicholas replied coldly. He gestured to Amelia, who stood beside him with quiet dignity. Lady Amelia has been subjected to a campaign of defamation and fraud. Evidence suggests you are responsible, Timothy. You created forged letters designed to destroy her reputation and my trust in her. That is absurd, Timothy said, but his face had paled. The Baron's solicitor stepped forward. We have the confession of the messenger you hired. We have expert calligraphic analysis proving the letters forged. We have documentation of your investigation into the Hargrave family, including payments to former servants for information. The evidence is comprehensive and damning. Lady Penelope attempted her usual charm. Surely this is merely a misunderstanding that can be resolved between family. You spread malicious rumors about Lady Amelia throughout society, Amelia said, her voice steady and clear. You mocked my circumstances publicly, encouraged others to do the same, and attempted to isolate me socially. When that failed to prevent the Duke's interest, you allied with his cousin to manufacture scandal. That is not misunderstanding, Lady Penelope. That is calculated cruelty. Lady Hertford leaned forward. We have heard testimony from multiple sources about your conduct, Lady Penelope. Your behavior has been unconscionable. Timothy made one last attempt. Nicholas, we are family. Surely nothing, Nicholas interrupted. You attempted to destroy an innocent woman to protect your expectation of inheritance. That expectation is now forfeit. I am removing you from any position in family affairs. You will receive no support from the Pemberton estates. Furthermore, my solicitor is preparing documents that will make this known to our extended family and relevant social circles. You cannot do this, Timothy said, panic entering his voice. I can, and I have. Nicholas's tone allowed no argument. You may leave now. As Timothy departed, rage and defeat warring in his expression, Lady Hertford addressed Penelope. Lady Weston and I represent a significant portion of society's leadership. Your conduct will be made known to appropriate parties. I suspect you will find invitations significantly reduced in the coming season. After they had all departed, Nicholas turned to Amelia. You were magnificent. The way you confronted Lady Penelope, the clarity of your words. That was not a woman who needed rescue. That was a woman claiming her own power. Amelia felt something loosening in her chest, a knot of pain and doubt beginning to unwind. It felt good to speak truth after years of silence. Will you consider forgiving me? Nicholas asked quietly. Not immediately. I do not deserve that. But eventually with time and proof of change. I will consider it, Amelia said carefully. If your actions match your words. If you truly treat me as partner rather than project. If trust is rebuilt slowly and genuinely. Nicholas took her hand, holding it gently. Then I will spend however long necessary proving myself worthy of that consideration. You have my word, Amelia, and this time I will not break it. As she looked into his dark blue eyes, Amelia saw genuine contrition, determination, and something else that made her heart quicken despite her caution. Perhaps, she thought, broken things could be mended if both parties were willing to do the work. Perhaps trust, once shattered, could be rebuilt stronger than before. Only time would reveal the truth. But for the first time since that terrible confrontation at the Weston gathering, Amelia allowed herself to hope. The weeks that followed the confrontation with Timothy and Lady Penelope brought subtle but significant changes to the rhythm of Amelia's days. Nicholas did not press for immediate resolution, did not demand forgiveness before it had been earned. Instead, he demonstrated through consistent action what words alone could never convey. He called at Brook Street 3 times weekly, always at appropriate hours, always announced, never presuming upon her time. "I cannot ask you to accept an apology I have not earned," he said during one of those visits. "So I will earn it. My solicitor will publish the retraction under my name, not yours. The charitable school at Somerset, your plan, not mine, will be endowed this quarter in your mother's memory. And when decisions concern us, they will never be taken in rooms where you are not present. If we have a future, it will be one we govern together." She studied him a long time. "Then begin, Your Grace. Begin with truth spoken aloud, in public, where it costs." "Tonight," he said, "in my own ballroom. Always at appropriate hours, always with Beatrice or the Baron present to satisfy propriety." But the nature of their conversations shifted. Nicholas brought documents related to the northern estates, spreading plans across the drawing-room table, and asking Amelia's opinion on proposed improvements to tenant housing. "The architect suggests this design," he said one afternoon, indicating architectural drawings. "But I wonder if the kitchens are adequately sized. You have experience managing a household with limited resources. What would serve these families best?" Amelia studied the plans carefully, noting the placement of windows, the size of hearths, the storage areas. "The design is sound, but here," she pointed to the kitchen layout, "you might expand the pantry space and add shelving here. Families with many children need room to store provisions when they can afford to buy in bulk." Nicholas made notes immediately, his expression thoughtful. "That is precisely the sort of practical insight my architect lacks. Will you review the other cottage designs as well?" It became their pattern. Nicholas brought matters requiring decision, and they debated approaches together. School curricula for children of tenant farmers, medical provisions for the village near his northern estates, distribution of charitable funds to families affected by poor harvest. He did not simply seek her approval, he genuinely valued her perspective, often adopting her suggestions and crediting her when discussing implementations with his steward. "You treat me as though I have real understanding of these matters," Amelia observed one afternoon as they reviewed correspondence from the estate manager. "You do have real understanding," Nicholas replied simply. "You managed your father's household through impossible circumstances for years. You understand scarcity, resourcefulness, the dignity of people struggling against difficult odds. My education taught me theory. Your experience taught you truth. The trust between them rebuilt slowly, conversation by conversation, decision by decision." Nicholas never made assumptions about her availability, always asked rather than commanded. When invitations arrived for social events, he inquired if she wished to attend rather than assuming she would accompany him. Small courtesies that acknowledged her autonomy, her right to choose her own path. 2 months after the confrontation with Timothy, Nicholas arrived at Brook Street carrying a leather portfolio. Amelia received him in the garden, where spring had given way to early summer and roses bloomed in profusion against the stone walls. "I have something to show you," he said, settling beside her on the stone bench beneath an arbor heavy with climbing roses. "Something I should have offered from the beginning." He withdrew documents from the portfolio, legal papers covered in precise script. "These are marriage settlement papers. My solicitor has prepared them according to my specifications." Amelia felt her pulse quicken, though she maintained outward composure. "Marriage settlement. If you will hear my proposal, which I hope you will, these documents ensure certain protections." His voice was steady but held an undercurrent of emotion. "The settlement provides you with an independent income of £3,000 annually, held in trust solely in your name. Additionally, Willowbrook Manor, a property in Kent, would be deeded to you personally, not as part of the ducal holdings, but as your own estate. If anything should happen to me, if our marriage should somehow fail, You would have means and property, independent of my title or fortune. Tears stung Amelia's eyes. You would give me such security? I would give you autonomy, Nicholas corrected gently. I never want you to feel trapped, to wonder if you stay with me from choice or necessity. This ensures that whatever happens, you will always have the power to choose your own future. He set aside the documents and took her hands in his. Amelia, I am asking you to marry me. Not to rescue you, not to fulfill some obligation, but because I love you. I love your intelligence that challenges mine, your compassion that humbles me, your strength that survived 7 years of society's contempt. I love the way you see past titles and fortunes to the person beneath. I love that you make me want to be better, not for society's approval, but because true responsibility requires constant effort and growth. Nicholas, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. I am asking you to be my partner in the truest sense, he continued. To help me manage these estates not as ornament but as equal. To build schools and hospitals and opportunities with me. To argue with me when you think I am wrong. To challenge my assumptions. To bring your perspective to decisions that affect thousands of lives. I need you, Amelia. Not a duchess to grace my table, but you specifically, with your particular mind and heart. Amelia looked into his dark blue eyes and saw complete sincerity, vulnerability, love. The man who had wounded her had learned from that failure, had spent months proving through action that his words held substance. Yes, she said softly, I will marry you. The kiss they shared beneath the rose arbor was gentle at first, tentative with new beginning. Then Nicholas's hand came up to cup her face, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of promise and passion, of patience rewarded and trust rebuilt. When they finally drew apart, both were breathless. Nicholas rested his forehead against hers. You have made me the happiest of men. And you have given me something I stopped believing possible, Amelia replied. A future built on respect and genuine partnership. The announcement of their engagement caused precisely the sensation they had anticipated. Society, which had dismissed Amelia as an aging spinster without prospects, suddenly found her transformation into the Duchess of Ravendale the most fascinating story of the season. The woman who had sat alone at every ball for 7 years was to marry the most desired duke in England. The wedding took place in early autumn at Ravendale Park, Nicholas's principal estate. The ceremony was held in the private chapel, a jewel of medieval architecture with stained glass windows that cast colored light across stone floors. Amelia wore a gown of ivory silk, simply cut but exquisitely made, with a veil of Brussels lace that had belonged to Nicholas's mother. Beatrice stood as matron of honor, tears streaming down her face throughout the ceremony, as she witnessed her sister finally receiving the happiness she deserved. The Baron smiled beside her, having played no small part in bringing this union to fruition. As Amelia and Nicholas exchanged vows, promising love, honor, and partnership, sunlight streamed through the chapel windows, illuminating them both in golden light. When Nicholas lifted her veil and kissed her as his wife, Amelia felt 7 years of invisibility and pain finally, fully, dissolve. 6 months later, on a crisp winter morning, Amelia stood in the estate office at Ravendale Park, reviewing accounts with Nicholas and the estate steward. She wore a simple day dress of deep blue wool, her hair arranged in a practical style that suggested a woman with work to accomplish rather than mere ornament to display. The school in Thornfield Village reports 23 children in regular attendance, the steward said, consulting his notes. Her Grace's suggestion to provide meals has increased enrollment significantly. Nicholas looked at Amelia with evident pride. The results speak to the wisdom of the approach. After the steward departed, Nicholas drew Amelia to the window overlooking the gardens and the estate beyond. Snow dusted the landscape, but smoke rose from cottage chimneys across the tenant farms, evidence of warmth and life. You have transformed this place, Nicholas said quietly. Not through grand gestures, but through genuine care for the people who depend upon us. We have transformed it, Amelia corrected. Together, as partners. He turned her to face him, his hands settling at her waist. Are you happy, Amelia? Truly? She considered the question seriously, as she considered all things. I am happy, she said finally. Not because you rescued me from difficult circumstances, but because we built something real together, Because you see me, value me, trust me. Because every day I wake beside a man who treats me as equal rather than ornament. Good, Nicholas murmured, drawing her closer. Because I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring that happiness continues. Their kiss was interrupted by a knock at the door. Beatrice entered, her presence at Ravendale Park a frequent occurrence now that sisters who had been separated by circumstance could finally enjoy each other's company freely. "Am I interrupting?" Beatrice asked with evident amusement. "Always," Nicholas replied, though his smile held no reproach. "But you are welcome nonetheless." As the three of them settled before the fire to discuss plans for visiting the school Amelia had established, she felt a contentment that ran deeper than mere happiness. She had survived 7 years of invisibility, had endured loss and grief and public humiliation, and through it all, she had maintained her dignity, her character, her essential self. Now she sat in her own estate office, planning improvements that would affect hundreds of lives, partnered with a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. She was no longer Lady Amelia Hargrave, the forgotten spinster. She was Amelia Pemberton, Duchess of Ravendale, a woman who had claimed her own power and built a life of genuine meaning. That evening, as she and Nicholas prepared for bed, she caught sight of their reflection in the mirror. The Duke and Duchess of Ravendale, yes, but more importantly, two people who had found each other when both had stopped believing such connection possible. "What are you thinking?" Nicholas asked, coming to stand behind her. "That love which arrives after long waiting, built on foundation of respect and genuine regard, may be the most precious kind," Amelia replied, "because it is chosen with full knowledge and clear sight, not blinded by youth or desperation." Nicholas wrapped his arms around her, and they stood together in comfortable silence. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the estate in white. Inside, warmth and love and partnership created sanctuary against whatever difficulties the world might offer. For those who believe that happily ever after requires youth or fortune or society's approval, Amelia and Nicholas's story offers gentle correction. True happiness, the kind that endures through seasons and challenges, comes from seeing and valuing another person completely, from building trust through consistent action, from choosing partnership over performance, substance over superficiality, and sometimes when you stop searching and simply become the best version of yourself, love finds you precisely when you need it most. May you, dear listener, find such love in your own life. May you be seen, valued, cherished for exactly who you are. And may you sleep peacefully tonight, knowing that true partnership, built on respect and genuine affection, remains possible no matter how long the wait or how difficult the journey.